Hello and welcome to Midnight 29 Readings. I'm sorry to say that last week I wasn't well, and so you may see chapter 3 before this is not read by me, because I couldn't do a 40-minute video. No way could I read a 40-minute video. However, it'll be back to normal next week. This is chapter 4, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks again to Nico, and also thanks to Iron Pony, who is playing Hammer. I hope you enjoy. This is chapter 4. Get up, blockhead! I need you to fend them off! Luna shouted from the tower. Anvil groaned and rose to all fours, spitting mud out of his mouth as he did so. He felt scarred, with cuts and bruises, and wanted nothing better than to crawl into a dark place and go to sleep, preferably someplace dry with plenty of ale. A tooth. But he was honour bound to obey his princess. After the night festival, the rebels had decided to simply assault the palace, and Anvil and Hammer had been hard-pressed to keep them at bay. Or rather, he was having a difficult time. Glancing upwards, he could see his friend flying back and forth, bashing any Pegasus who attempted to enter through a window or balcony. Hammer didn't even seem to be tiring from the exertion. And from her tower, Luna was merrily tossing out lightning bolts at anyone who dared to come close. He, on the other hoof, was tasked with defending the lower portions of the palace from attack, and had endured quite a pounding from a wave after wave of angry Pegasi. More loyalists were approaching, and Anvil spread his wings to take flight. He flapped. Once. Twice. But nothing happened. He felt so heavy. He tried again, harder this time, but the result was the same. His hooves barely lifted from the mud they were caked in. "Lazy pony! I told you to move!" Luna yelled once more. "Don't fail me now!" Anvil gritted his teeth and poured all his remaining strength into getting himself out of the mire that he was in. The mud was ridiculously thick and heavy and sticky, and his wings were having no effect on providing any lift whatsoever. After muttering frustratedly, he looked over to see what the matter was, and his jaw dropped. His wings were gone, and only a pair of nubs was visible on his back.
"Well, look at that! A Pegasus without wings!"
A voice hooted from above. Looking up, Anvil saw the loyalists flying low in lazy circles around him. Another side remark were made, in addition to one about the dubiousness of parentage, and the lot of them began to laugh. Some even gathered clumps of thunderclouds and began to stomp rain down on him. He tried to run away, but found that he was still stuck in the mud. "Well, that was unfortunate," Luna said. She was right next to him. He gaped at her.
"Your Highness, something's wrong. It's..."
She rolled her eyes as she cut off his words. "Congratulations, you're now an earth pony, and I have no such ponies in the guard. You are released from my service."
"What? But how?"
She scowled and waved a dismissing hoof at him. "Off with you now." There was a sickling, squelching sound at his hooves, and Anvil realized he was sinking into the ground. He struggled with all his might, shifting his weight from one hoof to another in an attempt to free at least one of them, but to no avail. The mud was relentless. When he was about to up to his neck, he tried to utter a tactic plea for help, but only succeeded in letting a slurge pour down his throat. He began to choke. Anvil gasped and woke to the darkness. Or at least, that was his initial thought. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he realized that he was back in his bed of the guest chamber. that he'd vacated some time before. Silver moonlight was pouring from the balcony and windows, and a statue was standing right next to his bed.
Bad dreams?
Hammer inquired.
Of a sort.
Anvil confirmed. After thumping a hoof on his head to ensure that he wasn't still dreaming, not one of his brightest ideas though, there was still a dull ache in his skull, another thought to occur to him, and he hastily checked for the presence of his wings. Thankfully, they were still there, safe and sound, and he breathed a sigh of relief.
How long?
He asked.
A night and a half again.
His friend replied.
Only.
He recalled that his injuries were more than simple bruises. He flung off his blanket and gave his body a curiously examination. He then flexed and stretched his limbs and muscles, but found little to complain about apart from a few slightly sore spots and a minor headache. Luna's healing spell had truly worked wonders on him. He would have expected to have taken weeks to recover, even with his altered body.
You can thank Luna when we see her.
Hammer stated.
She had been visiting you every few hours whenever she found the time.
Anvil remembered the night festival and suddenly sat bolt right.
What have I missed? Later.
The big Pegasus said.
Sleep some more.
Anvil squared his shoulders and put on a petulant face.
Oh, but I feel fine. Really. I would hate to keep her waiting on account of my sleep.
Anvil moped.
I could break a leg for you if that would ease the guilt. You're almost as bad as the healers, you know.
Anvil moped.
No pony trusts a patient, not even if he's the champion of the night guard.
He put on his best woeful face. Hammer was thoroughly unmoved.
My heart bleeds for you,
he said flatly. Then, making his way towards the door, he added,
Luna left for the villages a few hours ago before this silver moon. She should be back by the time you're ready. Nothing you can tell me, at all.
His friend shook his head.
It would only keep you up. Now, if you would excuse me, I have to send my condolences to the princess. What happened? You're back on your hoofs.
Anvil snorted and grudgingly lay back down on the pillows. Even after Hammer had left, he still felt inclined to be a little rebellious, but that was before he started snuggling back into the blanket. The warm softness started to lull him away.
Hospitals. I really shouldn't be getting used to this.
Reluctantly, and in spite of himself, he began to drift off. Some hours later, Anvil, Hammer, and several royal pages were standing watch on one of the guard balconies, awaiting Luna's return from her visit to the outlying settlements. It was chilly on the balcony, and even though his newly replaced knight armor guard, the breeze was a distinct bite to it. Their breath fogged easily, and once or twice he thought he saw some snowflakes drifting in the wind. And down in the courtyard below, the trees rustled with the winds passing, and some of them were beginning to shed their leaves. Bucketsful at a time, it seemed. Far too early for that. As they waited, he busied himself with digesting the news on events that had transpired while he was incapacitated. According to Hammer, Luna had decided to join the fight herself. The loyalists were quickly routed, and quite a few of them had been taken prisoner. Amongst those tossed in the dungeons was the rogue Pegasus that had knocked him out, and a few other former guards. Unfortunately, none of them appeared to be high-ranking loyalists, and as one they had all refused to yield any knowledge of loyalist hideouts. Even with the looming threat of Luna's anger, if what some of the night guard said was true, the Moon Princess had been substantially less than gentle with her magic in subduing the attackers. Sprained wings and limbs were aplenty, as well as the lightning-scorched hides and mane-tails. Some pony even had broken bones, although it was unclear whether it was because of a physical blow or a magical one. The victim had been quite unforthcoming with the details. Before long, Anvil spotted Luna gliding towards the palace at a leisurely pace, silhouetted against the looming blue moon. All seemed well for a moment, but as she drew near, it became apparent that things hadn't gone very well for her visit. She was silent when she landed, and Anvil noted that there was frost on the leading edges of her feathers, just as she folded her wings.
Greetings, Your Highness. I trust your journey went well,
one of the pages said. Luna didn't seem to hear. In fact, She appeared not to have taken notice at all. She wordlessly strode past them without even sparing a glance. Her eyes stared straight ahead towards the room's exit, and she made no effort to undo the massive bar that locked it. The double doors glowed blue and shuddered for a second before the bar cracked and splintered. She then simply barged through the now unlocked doors, trampling over the mangled remains of the bar. Anvil and Hammer exchanged looks and quickly trotted after her, and behind them followed the nervous pages. They followed her past the royal chambers and feast halls, through several corridors, and down several flights of stairs. Anvil guessed that she was heading for the library, which was her usual haunt since her transformation. Servants along the way made themselves scarce, and in the narrower places, ponies who happened to be in Luna's intended path made little effort to hide their haste in getting out of her way. Her appearance undoubtedly boded ill for any pony who happened to be an obstruction, whether intentionally or otherwise. For the most part, no pony said a word, but when they were only a corridor away from the library, one of the royal pages finally found the courage to speak up.
Your Highness, is there anything we can do to assist you?
Up until then, Luna had seemed to be trotting at a brisk pace with downcast eyes. But at the sound of the page's voice she seemed to become more alert. Her neck straightened, and she held her chin up once more, and pace gradually slowed, until she stopped altogether and slowly turned to face them. The page waited patiently, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his discomfort. The silence stretched, but the princess said nothing, quietly giving each one of them appraising looks. Under the gaze of hers, Anvil felt his own disquiet tightening. Yes, I suppose there is something you can do. Get out of my sight.
Your Highness?
Another page inquired.
There are several matters that require...
Do not make me repeat myself. Away with you, she snapped. Her pupils were narrowed to slits. Her mouth was set in a rather unpleasant downwards curve, and her mane and tail seemed to shift and shimmer in it with irritation. The pages simply stuttered their apologies and hastily backed away, before turning tail and cantering off without looking back. Anvil inclined his head in submission, as did Hammer, and was just about to retreat when the Min Princess shook her head and said, "No, wait. You two may stay if you wish."
As you command.
Hammer replied. Luna snorted. "As you wish, not as a command." Her expression was already softened somewhat, although the worry line on her brow were still quite plain from all to see. Then she seemed to take proper notice of Anvil. "You look so much better tonight," she said. Anvil flexed his wings and managed a small grin.
My friend tells me that I have a good caregiver. I owe her much. Again.
Luna remained unsmiling. "Well, it is comforting to know there's at least something I can manage with any semblance of competence." She averted her eyes for a moment. "I have been to most of the settlements, and what Hazel Hawke said is true. The farther it is from Everfree, the colder it becomes." She paused in thought for a moment, then shook her head in disbelief. "It's almost snowing on equestrian borders. Snowing! It cannot be so soon. Not even the night. Not even with the night. Something is amiss. This cannot be the fault of my eternal night. It cannot be my fault alone."
Have you consulted the...
Luna promptly cut him off. "The Arcane Academy is no help in this matter. As far as they are concerned, the cold cannot be the work of a Pegasi or unicorns, and I need no fortune teller to say that many of them believe I'm the one to blame. They just dare not say it to my face, the cowards."
They were no help at all.
Anvil asked. "Wild theories and plain nonsense was what I received. Hermit alicorns, unicorn or Pegasus prodigies, abominable snowmares, nothing worth listening to, and the more credible ones were highly unlikely." Hammer pricked up his ears.
What might those have been, Your Highness?
Luna shook her head and waved a hoof in dismissal. "Never mind. It's not important. I have better things to do than investigate every old mare's tail that came out of their mouths. If anything, they were likely just trying to show something for all the time spent in the academy of theirs, or to hide the fact that they were so badly wanted to say that I'm the one responsible for this unfavourable climate." When she was finished, the princess took a deep breath and sighed heavily. "They also spoke true when they said that the crops are dying, I saw hoarfrost in every field, and not even half of the food is grown is remotely edible. There is little time. I must find a way to remedy this, either by counteracting this vile weather with magic, or finding a spell to force trees to produce food regardless of the climate.
Perhaps it is time to let it go.
Hammer said slowly. Luna's eyes narrowed. I dislike the direction in which this conversation is heading.
The sun would help.
I told you, my knight is not the cause of this. The Pegasus didn't falter.
That is not in dispute, Your Highness, nor is it the issue. But the fact remains. The sun will help with the cold and the crops, no matter whose fault it is. And the ponies will probably thank you for it.
Thank my sister, you mean? The sun is hers, not mine. The Moon Princess said sourly. Then she gave a dry chuckle and added, Odd that such advice would come from you. What happened to the pony who said it would have been unseemly for me to seek counsel from a guard? Hammer kept his eyes level with the alicorns.
You raised my position, and thus my responsibilities.
For once, I am inclined to agree with him, Your Highness. Equestria could use the sun's warmth, even if only for a while.
Anvil piped up. Luna shook her head. No, she said, and shook her head again. No, I will do anything for Equestria, but do not ask that of me. I have stood in the shadow of my sister for ages, receiving only the crumbs of the adoration, love, and respect that our subjects blessed her with. Ponies have spent lifetimes basking in the glory of my sister and shunning my darkness at the same time. She began to pace. Can you imagine enduring the fear and unease of an entire generation of ponies? What about 10, 100? To listen to the cries and wails of colts and fillies whenever the lights go out, and hear their parents hush them by telling the stories of friends playing in the summer sun. To see their fears put to rest by the simple lighting of a candle and a promise that the sun would rise in the morn. As if the sun is a cure for darkness. As if my sister is the cure for my disease. Anvil could find nothing to say to that, and his friend was equally stumped. Or he was keeping it to himself. Luna scrunched her eyes shut as if holding back tears, and looked at them miserably, and continued, I will say this. I will not be the one to light the candle for the crying children. I will not be the one to condemn my own nature. I will not become my sister. With each sentence her voice grew in strength and resolve. It was with barely suppressed frustration that she cried, And these loyalists, they flit around spreading fear and deceit, like old mares telling the children of tales of monsters in the dark to keep them from staying up late. Absent-mindedly, the Moon Princess grasped a nearby marble statue of a guard pony with her magic, ripped it off its foundations, and brought it hovering at just above her height. She then looked at each of them in the eye and asked, Do you know what happened when I tried to reassure the farmers that I would do everything in my power to save their livelihood? Her magical aura on the marble statue grew intensely, and the stone began to shudder and crack. They ran from me. The children screamed. Luna spat. The statue fractured further and collapsed explosively, and the remnants went all over the ground together into a mess of jagged marble that was no longer recognizable as a pony. Crisps and dust retained on the floor. They hid from me in their homes, and their children only screamed louder when I made some light to show them that I was a pony, and I meant no harm. The fragments shuddered too, and there was a torturous screeching sound of rock being ground and crushed. Fragments that were trapped between the large ones burst into the powder, and were then compacted into the hovering mess. When I tried to reason with them, the older ones cry, Celestia, save us! Another superstitious drivel. The mass of marble fragments compacted even more until they had coalesced into a spherical shape. The cracks in its surface retreated and began to fade away, and the entire mass started to shrink as well, grinding and screeching all the way. It was enough to convince Anvil that even rock could scream in agony. It was much the same in every farmstead, and these loyalists are the ones responsible, Luna intoned, voice suddenly suffused with deadly calm. They have turned my own subjects against me. She then let the remains of the statue drop to the floor. It was now a perfect sapphire, complete with a glossy, unmarred surface, and it produced a very solid crunch when it hit the floor, which promptly cracked. The dark alicorn eyed it for a moment, then returned her attention to them. They will not see the sun for a time yet, and they most certainly will not see the wonder of my firelight trees. Once they have been given to the ponies of Equestria as a gesture of goodwill, but the loyalists have ensured that it will be seen as an attempt to palisade or to pander to the whims of the traders. Jets of blue smoke blew out of her nostrils, and I am wary of negotiating with traders.
Would it not be best to first?
These traders call me a tyrant. They do not know the meaning of the word. She levitated the crushed statue once more and slowly rotated it, whilst inspecting it as if it were some precious gem that a jeweller was appraising. She continued, "Well, if they are so convinced that I am one, then perhaps it is time I lived up to their expectations. That little display of violence that they saw on the festival was nothing. They will have little idea of the restraint I have shown all this time." After the last word she flung the marble sapphire off to the side. She merely turned her head and tilted her horn slightly, without the littlest hint of effort, and yet the solid ball flew as if it was thrown by a giant. It punched a hole clean through several feet of stone wall and flew to the darkness without. Thankfully the ravine was the only thing on the other side of that wall, and not a place where any pony was likely to wander around. Otherwise he or she might have had a most unpleasant surprise. There was a sound of splintering wood as the ball crushed some trees, and a loud splash when it finally bounced into the river. When Anvil and Hammer said nothing in reply, the Moon Princess turned her back to them, and continued on her way to the library, this time at a much more sedate but deliberate pace. She called out to them, "My research may take some time, and I do not wish to be disturbed. For the time being you will both be in charge of royal matters. I trust you know better than to do anything disagreeable or foolish in my absence." Attending to royal duties was more tedious than Anvil could ever have imagined. Well, that was not entirely true. He'd stood watch as the princess themselves carried out the tasks of managing taxes, sealing, and maintaining allegiances with noble houses, and listening to the needs of the inhabitants of Equestria, but the difference was that he could always focus on keeping watch instead of actually listening and thinking consciously. This time around, his duty involved listening to a lot of nobles, as well as the mumbled counsel of half a dozen royal advisers. After an hour or so of such tedium, he felt that, were he to be made royalty, he would abdicate immediately without a second thought. On the other hoof, Hammer seemed to take the task without complaint, or at least none that was visible. He did, however, seem to be preoccupied with the thought of his own for most of the time. When it seemed like the task was never going to end, Anvil was spared from further boredom when one of the night guard recruits interrupted an audience by barging into the chamber unannounced. The unicorn seemed somewhat nervous and agitated. He looked quite skittish, and Anvil thought he could see sweat just beneath his helm. The newcomer bowed his apology to the scandalized Duchess present, and briskly saluted Anvil and Hammer.
Apologies for the interruption,
He began.
but there's a matter that needs your immediate attention.
The unicorn then glanced at the others in the chamber and opened his mouth to add something, but seemed to think better of it. Apparently Hammer knew a mute request for privacy when he saw one.
Very well.
He said to the guard, then turned to the others and addressed them.
I'm sorry, Duchess Trottingham, but we must continue at another time.
So saying, Hammer followed the recruit out of the chamber and into the corridor, with Anvil trotted after them, and once they had shut the doors and a nervous Archon had ascended that they were safe from unwanted ears, he advised.
You really should take a moment to settle down before bringing news like that. The House Lords get rather nosy and jittery when they are not privy to ill news. And any pony can see that you're less than happy with what you have to tell us. You shouldn't be sweating like that in this cold.
The former recruit cleared his throat and replied.
Yes, sir.
On with it, Cumber.
Hammer said. At first, Anvil was surprised that the big Pegasus was familiar with him. Then he called that his friend had overseen the training recruits. Now that they thought of it, Cumber seemed somewhat more relaxed in Hammer's presence, although something was obviously still troubling him. He kept shifting in his stance, and didn't seem to stop sweating.
It's Summer Cloud.
Cumber said.
Rippledew told me that she has information for you. She's finally willing to talk.
Useful information, I hope.
Hammer replied.
The princess is hardly in a mood for false leads.
She said that it was meant for your ears alone.
Mine or Anvil's?
Both of you, sir.
Oh?
Hammer gazed bored into Cumber's eyes. The small unicorn bit his lip and added.
Yes, that is all I know. I'm just repeating what I was told.
Hammer didn't seem convinced, however he did say.
That will do. Back to your duties then.
Cumber saluted and took off with rather more speed than was appropriate. When he was out of earshot, Anvil turned to his friend and inquired.
Quite the interrogator, aren't you? Was that really necessary? Did he give you trouble in training?
Feeble bugs. But that's not the issue. Something was making him nervous.
Anvil looked his best friend over and rolled his eyes at the second bit.
Oh, of that I have no doubt.
Hammer flicked his tail and shook his head.
No, there's something else. He knows about it, but he's not telling us.
Are you certain?
We won't find out by standing here. Time to pay your mere friend a visit.
Anvil nodded and they made haste to the dungeon. As they glided on the cold, still air through the corridors, he clarified.
I might add, she's not a mare friend. Not yet.
If you say so.
The flight down to the dungeon proved uneventful, unless Anvil considered the tension in the air to be somewhat noteworthy, which he did. When Rippledew opened the doors for them, he noted that the guard seemed uncharacteristically alert. Boredom of casual indifference was usually written on his face instead. Indeed, Hammer and he were actually spared the verbal abuse that was often directed at them whenever he trotted past the cells of the former guards, and he highly doubted that it was because of his friend's presence. Some of the empty cells had gained occupants since the night festival, and he had expected a less than cordial greeting from them as they trotted by. After all, most of the newcomers were swathed in bandages after being gripped and flung around like rag dolls by Luna's magic. The unluckier ones were sporting scorched, featherless wings as a result of unfriendly encounters with the Princess Lightning Bolt. But regardless, most of the prisons were strangely silent and attentive, seeming content to glare at or observe them from the corners of their eyes, as if they were waiting for something to happen, or perhaps wishing that they would drown in the chamber pot. Inwardly, Anvil wondered if there had been any drastic alterations made in the dungeon's management that might have produced such a change in their behaviour. He made a mental note to ask Rippledew about it later. When they reached Summercloud's cell, they found the grey unicorn sitting on her haunches expectantly. Nightmare Moon hasn't been very reasonable, has she?
What do you know of it?
Hammer asked. Somebody in the next cell snorted, and a new voice muttered.
Enough to tell that she's unlikely to save Equestria anytime soon.
Anvil stared a little, then trotted over to the adjacent cell. His eyebrows shot up when he saw who had spoken. Yellow coat, scruffy white mane, bright green eyes, the rogue Pegasus. She was performing cartwheels in the confines of her cell, apparently in the midst of a wing exercise routine. When she caught sight of him standing at the bars, she dropped back onto the floor and blurted.
Oh, it's you.
She then inspected him with a frown. She said,
You look quite well for someone who should be crippled.
Anvil remembered that aerial feat of hers. It was almost enough to make his bones ache.
You are an impressive flyer. What's your name?
White Wind. Served under Captain Bully.
A royal guard. and a former trainee of the Night Guard's own captain, no less. Her name was unfamiliar, though. She had probably been in the batch of youngsters who had just completed their training prior to Luna's coup,
Summer's told me much about you,
White Wind announced.
and I'm surprised that you aren't on our side. I would have expected the heroes of Cobbleville to stand up for the ponies of Equestria.
You should know that Luna played her own part in saving Cobbleville.
Hammer pointed out. He also trotted over to White Wind's cell. The captive, Pegasus, shrugged.
Except that now she's the dragon instead of the savior.
From her own cell, Summercloud added,
The poorest and weakest of Equestria, the ones who need her most, are not going to receive what they need in time. It won't be long before the cold and darkness destroys the last of the crops, and then...
There was a slight pause at this point, as if she's dreading what she was about to say.
And then ponies are gonna die. Not trees, not animals. Pony.
Anvil was a little torn as to whom she should reply first, but White Wind had apparently picked up on his indecision, so she spread his wings once more and resumed her exercise, as she executed successful barrel rolls whilst remaining stationary in the air. She said,
Don't mind me. Summer has important words for you, and I've taken enough of that time.
With that settled, they returned to Summercloud.
Whatever you may have heard, she does still care about ponies.
Anvil said. Specifically, she means to take care of them her way, Summer retorted. Not the way they need it, but the way she wants to. He shook her head and then whispered, I hope Celestia can forgive me for saying so, but your Luna is delusional, she insisted, staring him straight in the eyes. As much as Anvil hated to admit it, Summercloud's assertion was somewhat in truth. Luna was not blind to the reality of the situation, and neither was she evil or delusional, but she had become obvious that she was very selective on what she chose to accept. Any solution to Equestrian's troubles that involved either Celestia or the sun was disregarded and completely beyond compromise. It was disturbing to think that she might refuse to resort to those measures until Summer's prediction came true.
That's not what you wanted to tell us.
Hammer stated.
There is a reason you wanted to keep this from the ears of every pony else.
You must understand that at least for now, she's not fit to...
Spare us.
Big Pegasus interrupted.
What do you propose?
Summercloud seemed genuinely surprised. Anvil suspected she must have prepared quite a speech in anticipation of resistance from his stoic friend. In fact, he himself had not expected the quickness at which she had asked for her proposal. She blinked once, then twice. Then I will not waste your time, the grey mare answered, and then slipped into her teaching demeanour, completed with a slight speculative tone of voice and light-hearted pacing. Nightmare Moon, Luna, is not herself at the moment. Unicorns can sometimes experience a phenomenon where excessively strong emotions can cause involuntary magical surges and physical transformation, and if the transformation is conductive to further emotional stress, the change can be self-perpetuating. Here she paused for breath. So now it stands to reason that alicorns can be affected the same way, only on a greater scale.
And how are we to change her back?
Hammers asked. Summer put a hoofer to her chin. In this state, unicorns usually exhaust themselves after a while, but since Luna's transformation, it's only seemed to make her stronger. She shook her head. Regardless, the point is that she is unlikely to recover on her own. Celestia herself was about to restore her, but Luna had anticipated the intent.
The elements of harmony.
Anvil concluded. Correct,
Luna hid them away.
he pointed out.
And as far as I know, she hasn't told anyone, nor retrieved them from their hiding place.
That's where my plan comes in. I know someone who can find them,
This pony must be very enlightened.
Anvil said.
Who and where?
I met him before I was caught. He resides in the lower gardens. Anvil recalled that Summer had been wandering about the lower gardens some time before he had been caught. As far as he knew, there was little down there, but the river and some trees and marshy vegetation, unless one counted decorative sculptures, but those could hardly provide much of way of intelligence conversation. Oh, and there was mud. Lots of it. Not a likely place for a pony to live in.
Must be quite the hermit.
Sort of, she replied. But there is something you should know. I will cast a spell on you before you can speak to him.
And what sort of spell would that be?
The grey unicorn rose to all fours and trotted over the bars. Come closer. I think you will be familiar with this one.
I've heard enough.
Hammer stated. He turned and began to make his way to the exit, but Anvil put a hoof and whispered.
Wait!
10 seconds.
his friend offered.
Well, I trust her. And so should you.
Hammer blinked.
Is that the best you can do?
10 seconds. What were you expecting?
Anvil retorted, then sighed and pulled him close to a whisper.
She knows better than to lose our trust at a time like this. I doubt she'd want to have the suffering of others on her conscience if we don't meet this informant on account of some silly spite on her part. Besides, I'll go first, and you can decide what to do if she really does try some nonsense on me.
Hammer nodded, and Anvil trotted back to her cell bars.
Now I'm really curious about this friend of yours.
He said.
Why in the world would your spell be needed to speak to him?
He's not a friend, and he doesn't speak. That was the only explanation she offered before she cast the spell on him. A wave of nausea was familiar this time, but only lasted a moment. The display of lights in his head was terrible in one corner of his mind, instead of all over the place and blinding his thoughts like the last 2 times. He swayed a little, but managed to stay on his hooves, and gave Hammer a reassuring smile. Then it was the Big Pex's turn. Anvil was slightly annoyed that his friend showed no sign of discomfort, apart from a creased brow, a few rapid blinks and a quick shake of the head. Considering the fact that he had experienced the spell 1 time more than his friend, it was almost unfair that Hammer seemed to be more used to it than he. He flicked his tail and decided that the thought was not worth pursuing. The empathy spell will only last for an hour or 2, so it would be best if you went down there immediately and you acquire the elements. You will have to bring them back to me. I studied a reasonable amount about their history as a novice, and I believe I know enough to provide them with the catalyst spell to begin Luna's restoration, Summer advised.
You seem well prepared.
She shrugged. There's little else to do in this place.
Fair enough. But that doesn't explain how you know so much about what has been happening outside.
The Big Pegasus then approached her closely as the bars would allow, and added.
And Rippledew is under strict orders not to converse with prisoners.
The unicorn's eyes widened. Well, he's not the only one in here. The servants do speak amongst themselves when they come to clean the place.
We can worry about servant gossip another time.
Anvil piped.
For now, I think we have far more interesting things to do.
His companion seemed inclined to disagree, but dropped the subject anyhow. With that settled, they turned and began to make their way back to the exit. But as they trotted off, Anvil slipped to glance at Summercloud from the corner of his eye, and spotted her letting loose a little sigh of relief. At first, he thought that she might have been hiding something, but then decided that perhaps she was just plain nervous, since her plan very much amounted to all of them committing treason in Luna's eyes. If the chill of the air in the place was considered uncomfortable, then the dampness of the river and the little waterfalls coming off the cliff made the flight into the lower gardens a bleak affair. Droplets of chilly water had formed and clung to Anvil's wings, and he could feel the wetness slowly seeping into his coat. He'd have quite a time drying off his armour later, lest the metal rust into uselessness. The lower gardens were often enshrouded in entire purgibly fog, and the pale light from the glowworm lanterns that were strapped to the saddles only succeeded in penetrating it slightly. Moonlight was practically non-existent down here. Old stone benches and water fountains dotted the area, as a reminder of old days when the river was young and had not yet carved its way into the gardens. Since then, thick clumps of reeds had grown into the riverlets and had encroached into the garden of the main river. Shrubs and small trees grew on the bits of elevated soil or gravel that were safe from running water, with their trunks and roots mostly covered in a thick layer of crisp, bristly green moss. Frogs sang in the darkness, and somewhere in the fog, beyond the reach of the lamp, was the sound of something splashing around in the river. With a few powerful strokes of their wings, they were able to temporarily clear away a portion of the fog, just enough to spot the entrance to a cave that Summercloud had mentioned. It was a triangular crack in the base of the cliff wall, just about high and wide enough to admit an alicorn with folded wings. They entered it one at a time, with Anvil bringing up the rear, and when he spared a moment to look back outside, the fog had swallowed the garden once again.
Some pony must really like his privacy. I doubt he gets many visitors.
Anvil murmured. Beyond the fact that her informant lived here, Summer had refused to volunteer any more details and simply told them that they would know why when they finally saw him. Hammer grunted in assent. Inside the cave, as much as any pony would expect, excessively damp with a slight reek that reminded one of marsh mud, and a generous helping of grit and filth on walls. A short tunnel led deeper into the cave, and it was roughly the same size as the entrance. Strangely enough, the tunnel had a fairly even floor of carved rock, which suggested that it was meant to be accessed by ponies, although it was beyond Anvil why those who had made it had bothered to make the place a little more accommodating whilst they were there at it. He inspected the floor closely and saw that there were 3 sets of hoofprints in the grime of the floor, one belonging to his companion, and the other 2, probably Summer Cloud when she first come and gone. When one of his wings brushed up against the wall and came away smeared, he quickly groused to himself. Small wonder she needed a bath. The end of the tunnel opened up into a circular cavern, one large enough for 30 or so ponies to fit comfortably in, and high enough to accommodate a decent-sized tree. They were no longer needed to walk in single file, and so they stood side by side as they entered the cave's interior. Mushrooms were growing everywhere, and in the centre of the cavern stood a filthy stone object that showed signs of recent attempt to get it cleaned. There were patterns of remnant grime on the surface where its hooves had scraped it all away, in addition to random hoofprints on the ground at its base. It looked strangely familiar at first, until Dragon Anvil realised what it actually was. A long, flexible body, mismatched appendages, draconic tails, stone,
Well, he's not a pony.
Anvil declared. And that was chapter 4. I would like to thank again Nico and the Iron Pony, as well as 2 others I forgot to mention. My boyfriend, Link, and my best friend, Robster. So I'd like to thank them as well. I'll leave links to the ones who have YouTube channels in the or to their Twitter page in the description. And thank you for watching, and see you all next week. Stay brony!